what we want to do is talk about some of Donald Trump's accomplishments. Unfortunately, the events of the past couple of weeks, past couple of months, really have overshadowed a lot of the good that Donald Trump has done and should be remembered for. He has a very positive legacy. In fact, so many things that we can't even enumerate them all on this show without staying here all day, which we're not going to do, and which you wouldn't do if we did do it. There are as we sat down to talk about what we wanted to cover, there were so many things that we just couldn't do justice to that didn't make the list. For instance, his legacy in the Middle East, I think, is something no one wants to talk about. Something that president after president for decades has worked to accomplish with Israel and some of her surrounding nations. We're not going to go into that in any depth today, but that's one that should not be forgotten.
We've got some Middle East stuff later on down the road.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you have reference to it. Yes,
and
which is
real quick. Like, I know we don't want to dive too deep into it, but I will say it is telling how quiet, like, the media all mocked Trump when he talked about, bringing some semblance of peace to the Middle East. So it'll never happen. It's impossible.
Right.
And, once he actually gets a few deals done, you don't hear a peep.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Silence. No, right. And how many presidents had promised to move the embassy to Jerusalem as well? Presidents, it should be noted, on both sides of the aisle. And none of them did it until Donald Trump. So we just talked about some of the things we're not going to talk about today. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight that I think are particularly interesting accomplishments of Trump's. One, because it's been so effective, and another because I think it could be long-lasting. I want to get your input on that. The first is deregulation. Donald Trump, in running for office, promised that he would eliminate 2 regulations for every new one that he put in place. And he did that. Forbes came out with an analysis of that, of his efforts in that roughly a month ago as he was closing out December. And according to their count, in 2017, for every new regulation the federal government put in place, 22 were eliminated. Now, of course, it depends on how you count them, and different people will argue with that number a little bit. Trump detractors will say, no, it's not 22, it's only 13. Whatever. That's still an amazing number. In 2018, it was 12-1, according to Forbes analysis. In 2019, it was 4.3-1. In 2020, it was just shy of 2-1, at least at the time they were doing their analysis. So he didn't quite hit that goal in 2020, but over the course of his 4-year term, he obviously hit that goal and far better. Estimated cost savings just in 2020 from the deregulation efforts amounted to about $100 billion. So that was a pretty significant effort on his part, largely by executive order. And then the other issue that often comes up, maybe most often when we talk about Donald Trump's legacy, it's the federal bench, the appointments that he made to federal judgeships. Just to highlight a few, he appointed, or nominated, I guess I should say, 230 federal judges overall during his 4 years. 30% of all appeals court judges are now Donald Trump appointees. That's a huge percentage. Of course, we all know the 3 Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. And 2 quotes I'm going to read very quickly. One, this is from Jonathan Adler, a law professor at Case Western Reserve University School of Law in Cleveland. My condolences to Cleveland, by the way. Not just for losing this past weekend, but for being Cleveland. Trump has basically done more than any president has done in a single term since President Jimmy Carter to put his stamp on the judiciary. That's a pretty definitive statement, and pretty dramatic given that Congress under Carter added, I think, 150 new judgeships, new positions.
So he had to get something done.
Yeah, exactly. And how big is that? He expanded the federal bench, and then Trump filled it. So that's a pretty significant comparison between those two. And then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell recently said, it's by far the most long-lasting accomplishment of the current administration. And I think I agree with that. And I wanted to get you guys to weigh in on that. Some of these judges, of course, were quite young. Some were in their 30s even, and so could be around for 3 decades or longer. These appointments are, of course, for life. So unless they do something, unless they retire or do something that warrants removal by impeachment, which is it happens, but it's pretty darn rare. They're going to be around for a long time. But it's also harder to quantify the impact of the federal judgeships, whereas deregulations, you can count them, you can say, they saved, you can at least estimate, we saved $100 billion. That's not nothing. That's nothing compared to the whole federal debt, but it's not nothing. And so that one is easier to kind of get your arms around. Which of these two do you think is the more significant change, and what do you think is what do you measure that by? How do you decide what's more significant?
Well, I think the courts are the more significant change. I love the deregulation. I think it was a great accomplishment. Unfortunately, Joe Biden can re-implement a lot of that stuff by using executive orders. So don't be surprised if tomorrow or in the days and weeks to come, he implements a lot of those regulations again, because a lot of those were from the Obama administration. And Joe Biden has made it very clear that he wants sort of a return to the Obama administration.
2.0.
Right. So I don't think that's as lasting as I would like it to be. I think when it comes to regulation and stuff like that, it really just changes based off of the administration. Now, the courts, on the other hand, that's Trump's legacy, because it's going to live past him after he is no longer in office. It's going to live past him, like you said, for 30 or 40 years. And
probably past his lifetime.
Past his lifetime, yeah.
And that's office, yeah.
That's what a legacy is. It's something that lives beyond you. It's bigger than Trump. It's bigger than the Republican Party. It's about the Constitution and America, and
it's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see.
Thank you, Hamilton.
You're welcome.
So I think that's his biggest. Well, not biggest of those two things. I think that's the bigger accomplishment, just in terms of it lasting longer. We have all these young people who the left loves to decry the Federalist Society, and sort of there's all these conservative judges, right, who maybe come up the same way, and they're sort of groomed to be constitutionalists, and the left makes this out to be something that's really bad, like, oh, those scary lawyers from the Federalist Society are coming again. That's not true. They're good because they like the Constitution, and Trump had great advisors who told him you should nominate these people because they are constitutionalists and originalists.
Elected
and it's huge. It's huge. The left uses it as a boogeyman, and it's a really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the federal bench is clearly going to be the longer-lasting legacy, but I do think one interesting thing with the deregulation is that, as Joe alluded to, a lot of that's probably going to get torn up by Biden coming up. But in a sense, it does. I think Trump's done a good job. Not that he's like trying to set up Biden to fail or anything like that, because Biden's going to do this himself. But it does feel as though that's a really good marker, because Biden right now, I don't think has, like we've seen the stories, like people like on the squad and what have you are already upset with him because he's not doling out as much money as he possibly
he's
can.
Not leftist enough.
Yeah, which is mind-boggling. But this just gives Biden another pitfall to fall into. And I don't think Trump is intentionally trying to sabotage Biden in any way. And Biden could, easily avoid these pitfalls by not, adding all unnecessary excessive spending. But I do think it will be one way in which, Trump slashed $100 billion, which, like you said, not an insignificant amount of money, maybe compared to the national debt. Yeah, it is fairly insignificant. But, if Trump slashed $100 billion and Biden tacks on $500 billion, that's going to be sort of a lasting. That's something people will remember about the Biden era, and not for good reasons.
Yeah, no, that's true, Brian. I think the one thing we don't think about a lot, or haven't recently, because the stock market, for instance, has done so well. I mean, the economy under Trump did very, very well. It got hit by Corona, obviously, but all the lockdowns, and that, it wasn't actually Corona. It was
the lockdowns,
the useless lockdowns, the now proven useless lockdowns. in response to Corona. But other than that, Trump's economic record, domestic economic record, was pretty strong. Part of that was because it was so weak for the 8 years prior, because companies were so slow to invest. They were so scared to invest because they didn't know what crazy thing the Obama administration was going to do next. And so they didn't want to invest over here because over here could be regulated, out of existence a week from now. And so they didn't want to put it over here because the same thing could happen. And so companies were very slow to invest, slow to expand, slow to hire. I wonder if we're going to see the same kind of concern from businesses, large and small, under a Biden administration. And regulation would be one of the ways that would be expressed.